In this video, I'm going to be discussing how to solve quadratic equations by graphing. Now, quadratic equation, just to review, is when I have something like this, a y equals 4x squared minus 8. And in my other videos, I've shown how to factor this, how to graph this, that sort of thing. What we're going to start doing now is solving this. So like, let's say I had 0 equals 4x squared minus 8. What do I do to solve this? And so the method I'm going to show today is how to solve it using graphing. Now the first thing we need to know is this thing called the zero of a function. The zero of a function is simply a value of x for which f of x is 0, meaning I take a number, plug it into my equation, and I get 0. Now the point of this video is to look at how to find these graphically. So if I'm looking at these points graphically, the zeros of a function are simply where the graph crosses the x-axis. Where the graph crosses the x-axis. So this is what we're going to be looking for when we solve these graphically, is where does it cross the x-axis. Now let's take a look at 3 examples. We're going to solve these. They're already graphed for us, so solving them shouldn't be hard. We're looking at what are the solutions of the equation. Basically, where does this equation, x squared minus 1 equals 0? So I'm going to be looking for where it crosses the x-axis. So my first one, I see, okay, it crosses here and here. This first point is negative 1, 0. And my other point is 1, 0. So my solutions to this first one are the x components. So my solutions are negative 1 and 1. So this graph, or this equation, has 2 solutions. Let's look at the next one. So I see here, okay, it only crosses the x-axis at one point, and that's the vertex. So this is the point, 0, 0, making my solution x equals 0. Now this can happen. We can have 2 solutions, we can have 1 solution. Now when there's 1 solution, we like to call this a double root. I'll talk about this more in a different video. Now this last set, I'm looking to see, okay, where does this graph cross the x-axis? Let me highlight that a little bit. So the x-axis is right here. And this parabola doesn't cross anywhere. So when that happens, we say no solution. Now let's take a look at an example of solving a quadratic equation by graphing when we aren't given the graph. Now if you want a more in-depth version of how to graph a quadratic, you can go watch my other video. This one's going to be kind of brief. Basically what we're going to do is just ignore the 0 for a moment, and we're going to graph the equation y equals x squared plus 6x plus 8. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to find my vertex. And remember, to find the vertex, we use negative b over 2a. Now in this case, my b is 6, so I have negative 6 all over 2 times 1. And let's see, that gives me a value of negative 3. So the x-coordinate of my vertex is negative 3. I need to find the y-coordinate, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the negative 3 and plug it into my equation. So what I get here is I get negative 3 squared plus 6 times negative 3 plus 8. Now I'm going to take a moment, pause for a second, just so you have time to put this in your calculator. If you're working through this with me, I want you to work it out, so that way you can check to see if you're doing it right. So if you plug this in, you should get a value of negative 1. So my vertex over 3 down 1 is right there. Next, I need my axis of symmetry, AOS. And that is always the x-coordinate of the vertex, so x equals -3. So I come over here, I sketch my little axis of symmetry. I'm going to take my time so that way it looks pretty good. And there we go. I got my vertex axis symmetry. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make a table of values to do some sketching. Now I always want to pick x's that are close to my axis symmetry and on the same side of the axis. So I'm going to pick the values -2 and -1. So if you go look at my other video, I show a nice little calculator trick on how to make this easy on you. But when I plug in -2, I get a value of 0. When I plug in -1, I get a value of 3. So if you want a more detailed example of how to do that, go look at my other video. But I'm going to plot the points. -2, 0 is here. -1, 1, 2, 3 is here. And the last step is I reflect across my axis symmetry. And I get my nice parabola. I'm going to take a second here. Make it pretty good. And not the best, but it'll work. So I've graphed my parabola. Now, like I said before, when we are finding the zeros or the solutions to this equation, we're looking to see where does the parabola cross the x-axis. Well, I see it crosses here and it crosses here. So that tells me I'm going to have two solutions. Now this point right here is 1, 2, 3, 4, so that is -4, 0. And this point right here is -2, 0. So my solutions to this particular problem are the x's that make my equation equal 0. Well, the x's that make my equation 0 are -2 and -4. And that's a brief tutorial on how to solve a quadratic equation by graphing. Basically, you set it equal to 0, graph it, and find where it crosses the x-axis. Hope this has been helpful.